Then he activated his environmental suit's full seal, checked that his systems were functioning, and headed toward the lower levels of the facility. Behind him, he heard the cruiser's engines humming to life as Lyra began her own preparations. The maintenance tunnel entrance was right where Lyra's husband's codes indicated it would be. A heavy metal hatch set into the facility's foundation, accessible via a rusted ladder that descended into darkness. Marcus activated his suit's lighting system and began the climb down. The tunnel below was partially flooded as expected, but the water was only knee-deep. Marcus waded forward, following the navigation device's guidance. The tunnel system was a maze, branching in multiple directions, but the codes Terran had left provided the optimal route. As he moved through the darkness, with only his suit lights pushing back the shadows, Marcus thought about the chain of events that had led him here. A simple patrol shift had become an international incident. A rescue had become a conspiracy investigation, and somewhere in the process, he'd stopped being just a patrol officer following orders and become something else entirely. Someone who chose to act on principle regardless of consequence. The tunnel ahead branched again, and Marcus consulted his navigation device. The harbor complex was still 40 minutes away at his current pace. 40 minutes to think about what he'd gotten himself into, and why he wouldn't change a single decision even if he could. Above him, somewhere in the flooded city, Lyra and Kaya were navigating their own dangerous path. 3 lives now bound together by circumstance and choice, united against corruption that had cost one family everything and threatened an entire civilization. The water in the tunnel began to rise. Marcus quickened his pace, knowing that time and tide waited for no one, and they had a truth to uncover before both ran out. But it's possible, Marcus pressed. And right now, possible is better than impossible. Before Lyra could respond, Kaya's voice called out from the back of the cruiser.
"Mama, come look at this."
They found the child standing in front of the communications console, which Marcus had thought was powered down. But Kaya had somehow activated the emergency monitoring system, probably by pressing random buttons with childlike curiosity. The screen displayed multiple news feeds from Xanthari broadcast networks. What caught their attention immediately was the breaking news banner scrolling across the top. Human patrol officer wanted for abduction of Xanthari citizens. Councilmember Vex offers reward for information. Marcus felt his stomach drop as his own face appeared on the screen. The image was from his official coordination office identification. Next to it were images of Lyra and Kaya marked as endangered citizens being held against their will by a human extremist. Extremist? Marcus said incredulously. "I rescued you from drowning." "He's controlling the narrative," Lyra said, her voice tight with anger. "Making you the villain so that when you're caught, no one will question what happens to us afterward. It's brilliant and despicable." Marcus watched as the news feed showed footage of his cruiser, clearly marked with coordination office insignia, near the commercial plaza where he'd found them. Security camera footage probably, or drone surveillance. Vex had been watching, waiting to see if anyone would break the non-interference order, and Marcus had walked right into the trap. "This changes things," Marcus said grimly. "We can't wait. We need to act now, before Vex consolidates his story and makes it impossible to counter." "We need the rest of Terran's evidence first," Lyra insisted. "Without it, we're just making accusations with partial proof. Vex will deny everything, claim the data I have is fabricated, and use his media control to bury the truth." "Where did your husband hide the other copies?" Marcus asked. Lyra pulled out a small data chip from a waterproof pouch she wore around her neck. "This contains the files I managed to retrieve, plus encrypted coordinates for the other hiding places. 3 locations total. One was his laboratory, but that was destroyed in the explosion that killed him. That leaves 2 others." She activated the chip using the cruiser's interface, and a map of the city appeared on the screen. 2 points glowed with soft blue light. One was in the university district in what appeared to be a private research library. The other was in the Harbor Administrative Complex, a government building that housed environmental monitoring records. "Both locations are heavily monitored under normal circumstances," Lyra explained. "But with the flood emergency, security resources are stretched thin. The university district is partially evacuated, and the harbor complex has been dealing with structural damage from the storms." Marcus studied the map, calculating distances and routes. The university district was closer, but would require navigating through more populated areas. The harbor complex was farther but near the industrial zones where they could move with less chance of recognition. We split up, Marcus decided. I'll go to the harbor complex. You and Kaya go to the university district. Absolutely not, Lyra said firmly. I'm not separating from my daughter. And you're the most recognizable person in this city right now. Every security officer and probably half the civilian population has seen your face on the news. She had a point. Marcus looked at the civilian clothes in his locker, then back at the environmental suits. An idea began to form. What if I wasn't recognizable? He asked. The environmental suits have full face seals and integrated breathing systems. In this weather, with the contamination from the floodwaters, seeing people in environmental gear wouldn't be unusual. I could pass as a disaster relief worker. Lyra considered this. It might work for casual observation. But if you're stopped at a checkpoint, they'll want to see identification. Then I don't go through checkpoints, Marcus said. I use the maintenance tunnels like we discussed. They'll get me close to the harbor complex. You and Kaya take the cruiser. Use the elevated transit routes to reach the university district. In the vehicle, with tinted windows and the passenger compartment configured for Zenthari comfort, you'll just be another family seeking refuge in the upper city. They're looking for a human with 2 Zenthari, Lyra pointed out. If it's just Kaya and me, we're less conspicuous. Marcus nodded slowly. It wasn't a perfect plan. There were dozens of ways it could go wrong, but doing nothing guaranteed failure, and time was not on their side. When do we leave? Kaya asked quietly. Both adults turned, not realizing the child had been listening to their entire conversation. Lyra knelt beside her daughter. Soon, little one. Marcus and I need to retrieve some important information that your father left for us. It will help us stop the bad people who are causing the storms. The ones who hurt Papa? Kaya asked, her voice small. Yes, Lyra said gently. The ones who hurt Papa. Kaya looked at Marcus, her large eyes filled with a child's directness. Will you keep my mama safe? The weight of that question settled on Marcus like physical pressure. He thought about all the training he'd received, all the protocols and procedures designed to prevent exactly this kind of personal involvement. But none of that training had prepared him for the reality of looking into a frightened child's eyes and being asked to protect everything she had left in the universe. I promise, Marcus said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. I'll do everything I can to keep both of you safe. Kaya seemed to accept this. She reached out and touched Marcus's hand, a gesture of trust that transcended species. Her crystalline skin felt cool and smooth against his own, like touching polished glass. They spent the next hour preparing. Marcus changed into an environmental suit, adjusting it for the best mobility while maintaining its protective functions. He programmed a route through the maintenance tunnel system into a portable navigation device and downloaded the access codes Lyra's husband had apparently collected during his environmental research. Lyra reviewed the cruiser's systems, familiarizing herself with the human controls. Kaya watched everything with quiet attention, occasionally asking questions that showed remarkable intelligence for her age. As the storm outside intensified again, hammering against the facility's deteriorating structure, Marcus checked his equipment one final time. The portable scanner, the sidearm he hoped he wouldn't need to use, the navigation device, and a backup communication unit, set to an encrypted frequency that should be difficult to monitor. Once we each retrieve the data, we meet at these coordinates, Marcus said, marking a location on both their navigation systems. It's an old weather monitoring station on the city's eastern edge, automated and supposedly abandoned. If anything goes wrong, if we get separated, that's our rally point. And if we're caught? Lyra asked quietly. Marcus met her eyes. In the hours since he'd pulled them from the flooded plaza, he'd come to deeply respect this woman. She had lost her husband, her home, everything familiar. Yet she fought on for her daughter and for a truth that most people would have abandoned out of simple survival instinct. If I'm caught, I'll buy you as much time as I can, Marcus said. Get Kaya to safety first, then decide what to do about the evidence. If we're caught, Lyra corrected, Vex will make sure none of us ever speak about what we know. So let's make sure we're not caught. They synchronized their timelines. Marcus would enter the maintenance tunnels at the facility's lower level, using service access that should be above the current water line. Lyra and Kaya would wait 30 minutes, then take the cruiser along the elevated industrial route toward the upper city. With luck, they'd both reach their objectives within 2 hours and rendezvous at the weather station before dawn. As Marcus prepared to leave, Kaya suddenly ran up to him and wrapped her small arms around his leg in an impromptu hug. "Thank you for helping us," she said, in her careful human common language. "You're a good person." Marcus crouched down and returned the hug gently. "You're very brave, Kaya. Your father would be proud of you." The child nodded solemnly, then returned to her mother. Lyra met Marcus's gaze over Kaya's head, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude certainly, but also something deeper. A connection forged in crisis, a mutual respect that transcended the cultural barriers between their species. "Be careful," Lyra said. "You too," Marcus replied. Kaya made a small sound, and Lyra immediately moved to comfort her daughter, speaking softly in Zenthari. Marcus gave them a moment, his thoughts churning. If what Lyra said was true, this was far bigger than a simple rescue operation. This was a conspiracy that threatened the entire Zenthari civilization, and humans were being deliberately kept out to prevent discovery. "Do you have any of your husband's evidence?" Marcus finally asked. Lyra nodded slowly. "Some of it." Terran was careful. "He made backup copies and hid them in several locations. I managed to retrieve one before Vex's security forces came to our home. That's why Kaya and I have been hiding in the flood zones. They've been hunting for us, but they assumed we'd try to flee to the upper districts where it's safe and dry. Instead, you stayed in the most dangerous area," Marcus said with newfound respect, "where they wouldn't expect you to be." "Until the water rose too high," Lyra admitted. "We were running out of places to hide. When we saw your cruiser, I thought we were finished. I thought you were another patrol sent to find us." Marcus checked the navigation display again. Zenthari security forces were converging on their location, drawn by the reports of unauthorized human activity. They had maybe 10 minutes before being surrounded. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Marcus said, making rapid calculations. "Somewhere neither Zenthari security nor my own superiors will think to look." "Where?" Lyra asked, hope and desperation mixing in her voice. Marcus remembered something from his initial orientation on Zenthar Prime, an old industrial district on the eastern edge of the city, abandoned when manufacturing moved to orbital facilities. The area had been scheduled for demolition, but was delayed by bureaucratic complications. It would be partially flooded now, but the main structures were built on elevated foundations. "I know a place," he said, changing course. "It's not comfortable, but it'll keep you dry and hidden." As he guided the cruiser through the flooded streets, dodging floating debris and submerged vehicles, Marcus realized he had just made a choice that would change everything. He wasn't just rescuing 2 refugees from a flood anymore. He was protecting witnesses to a massive conspiracy, defying the direct orders of 2 governments, and quite possibly starting an incident that could damage humans and Thari relations for years to come. But when he glanced back at Kaya, wrapped in a thermal blanket that was too large for her small frame, trying to be brave despite the fear in her eyes, he knew he couldn't have made any other choice. Sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking all the rules. The old industrial district loomed ahead through the rain, its skeletal structures reaching toward the storm-darkened sky like the bones of ancient giants. Marcus cut the cruiser's running lights and approached carefully, using passive sensors to navigate. Behind them, the sounds of security forces grew more distant. For now, they were safe. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. If they were going to expose Vex and stop the artificial storms, they would need help. They would need evidence, and they would need to convince both humans and Zenthari that the truth was worth fighting for. As the cruiser slid into the shadow of an abandoned processing facility, Marcus looked at Lyra and saw determination replacing the desperation in her eyes. Whatever came next, they would face it together. A human who had chosen conscience over orders, a Zenthari widow seeking justice for her murdered husband, and a small child who deserved a world that wasn't drowning in corruption and lies. The real storm was just beginning. The truth emerges. The abandoned processing facility smelled of rust and stagnant water. Marcus guided the cruiser through a loading bay entrance that barely accommodated the vehicle's width. Inside, the cavernous space was dark and silent, except for the steady drip of water from dozens of leaks in the deteriorating roof. Emergency lights from the cruiser cast long shadows across machinery that hadn't operated in years. Marcus powered down the main systems but kept life support and sensors active. They needed to conserve energy and avoid detection. The facility's old power grid was dead, which meant no electronic signatures for security forces to track. It also meant no heat, no light beyond what the cruiser provided, and no communication with the outside world. Lyra helped Kaya out of the passenger seat. The child had been quiet during the journey, her large eyes taking in everything with the solemn awareness of someone far too young to have experienced so much loss. She clutched a small object in her hand, Marcus noticed. A crystalline pendant that caught the emergency lights and refracted them into tiny rainbows. "That's beautiful," Marcus said gently, crouching down to Kaya's level. "Is it special?" Kaya looked at her mother before answering. When Lyra nodded encouragingly, the child spoke in halting human common language. "My father made it. He said it contains starlight from our home star. He said as long as I have it, part of him is always with me." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He thought about his own father, a merchant marine who had died when Marcus was not much older than Kaya. He still carried his father's old compass, even though navigation technology had made such devices obsolete decades ago. Some things transcended practicality. "Your father was right," Marcus told her, "and he would be very proud of how brave you've been." Kaya's crystalline patterns brightened slightly, the Xanthari equivalent of a small smile. It was the first positive emotion Marcus had seen from her since the rescue. Lyra touched her daughter's shoulder gently. "Why don't you explore the cruiser a little? Stay where we can see you, but look around. I need to talk with Marcus about important things." Kaya nodded and moved toward the rear of the cruiser where the equipment lockers were located. Marcus had emergency rations stored there, medical supplies and various tools. Nothing dangerous, but enough to keep a curious child occupied for a while. Once Kaya was out of immediate earshot, Lyra turned to Marcus with an intensity that made him straighten unconsciously. "I need you to understand what you've become involved in," she said quietly. "Council member Vex is one of the most powerful figures in Xanthari government. He has connections to military leadership, control over significant financial resources, and no moral boundaries. He has already killed my husband. He will not hesitate to kill you, me, and Kaya if he finds us. Then we make sure he doesn't find us," Marcus replied. "At least not until we can expose what he's done." "How?" Lyra asked, not with skepticism but genuine curiosity. "I have some of Terran's evidence, but not all of it. And even if we had everything, who would we present it to? The Council is compromised. Your Human Coordination Office has been ordered to stay out of Xanthari internal affairs. We have nowhere to turn." Marcus considered this. She was right about the political obstacles. The Human Coordination Office existed purely as a diplomatic and cultural liaison. They had no authority to investigate Xanthari crimes, and any attempt to do so would be seen as interference. The Xanthari Council would use human involvement as an excuse to dismiss any evidence as fabricated, but there might be another way. "What about Xanthari media?" Marcus asked. "Are there independent journalists, news organizations that might be willing to investigate if given credible evidence?" Lyra's crystalline patterns shifted through several colors as she thought. "There are some. The Meridian Chronicle has a reputation for challenging official narratives. Their lead investigator, Sean Morick, exposed a financial scandal 2 years ago that brought down 3 council members. But reaching him would be difficult. Vex's security forces monitor all major communication channels. What if we didn't try to reach him electronically?" Marcus suggested. "What if we went to him directly?" "The Chronicle's offices are in the upper city," Lyra said. "The checkpoints between here and there are heavily monitored. We'd never get through, especially not with Vex actively searching for us." Marcus stood and began pacing, his mind working through possibilities. The cruiser's storage compartments held various supplies, including some equipment that might help them. He pulled open one of the larger lockers and started taking inventory. Environmental suits rated for hostile atmospheres. Climbing gear, emergency medical equipment, standard patrol-issue sidearm and 2 spare power cells. Portable scanner. Emergency beacon, which he definitely wouldn't be using. And tucked in the back, almost forgotten, a set of civilian clothing he'd been meaning to take to the embassy laundry service. "We might not need to go through checkpoints," Marcus said slowly, an idea forming. "The flood has disrupted normal security patterns. They're focused on the disaster zones and the main transit routes, but there are service tunnels under the city, maintenance access ways for the water management systems. Some of them should still be passable, and they'd get us close to the upper districts." Lyra moved to stand beside him, examining the contents of the locker. The maintenance tunnels would be partially flooded, and they're not designed for navigation. We could get lost down there or trapped if the water rises. The rescue. The emergency channel crackled with static as Marcus Webb guided his patrol cruiser through the torrential downpour. Water crashed against the reinforced hull, each wave testing the limits of the vehicle's design. The planet Zenthar Prime had never seen rainfall like this. 3 months of relentless storms had transformed the coastal cities into drowning monuments of a civilization unprepared for such devastation. Marcus tightened his grip on the controls, his brown eyes scanning the flooded streets below. The Human Coordination Office had issued clear orders that morning. All personnel were to evacuate to the embassy compound. The Zenthari government had formally requested that humans cease all rescue operations, claiming it interfered with their traditional crisis management protocols, but Marcus had never been good at following orders that felt wrong. The communication system buzzed with another transmission from his supervisor. Webb, this is Coordinator Chen. Your beacon shows you're still in the flood zone. Return to base immediately. That's a direct order. Marcus reached for the transmit button, hesitated, then let his hand fall away. He would deal with the consequences later. Right now, his sensors were picking up a faint heat signature 3 blocks ahead. Isolated on what used to be a commercial plaza, now just a small island in a sea of churning brown water. As he maneuvered closer, his breath caught in his throat. 2 figures huddled together on a piece of elevated ground barely larger than a vehicle platform. Even from a distance, he could see they were Zenthari. Their distinctive crystalline skin patterns reflected dimly in his cruiser's searchlights, creating prismatic glimmers through the rain. One was an adult, the other clearly a child. They were holding each other against the wind, surrounded by rising water on all sides. Marcus made his decision in an instant. He brought the cruiser alongside their refuge, close enough that they could hear him over the storm, but far enough to avoid swamping their small sanctuary with his vehicle's wake. Through the viewport, he could now see them clearly. The adult was a female Zenthari, her skin showing the deep azure patterns of the northern territories. The child, no more than 7 or 8 in human years, clung to her with desperate strength, their large, almond-shaped eyes fixed on his cruiser with a mixture of hope and fear. The Zenthari had limited contact with humans. 5 years since the Human Coordination Office had established diplomatic relations, and still most Zenthari viewed humans as strange outsiders with incomprehensible customs. Marcus activated the external speaker system. His Zenthari was rough, learned from tutorial programs rather than natural conversation, but functional. I am Human Patrol Officer Marcus Webb. I can help you. Please let me take you somewhere safe. The female Zenthari's expression shifted through several emotions Marcus couldn't fully read. Zenthari facial expressions were different from humans, more subtle, conveyed through the slight color changes in their crystalline skin as much as through their features. She responded in accented but clear human common language. You should not be here. Your people were ordered to leave us to our own traditions. Traditions don't seem to be working out too well right now, Marcus replied, immediately regretting the bluntness. I'm sorry. I just mean that I have room in my cruiser, and you both look like you could use some dry ground. The child, shivering despite the relatively warm rain, looked up at her mother and spoke in rapid Zenthari that Marcus couldn't follow. The mother's crystalline patterns flickered with what might have been concern or contemplation. My name is Lyra, she finally said. This is my daughter Kaya. If you help us, you will face punishment from both our governments. Marcus smiled despite the situation. I'll worry about that later. Right now, let's focus on not drowning. Can you reach the loading hatch if I position it next to you? Lyra nodded slowly. Marcus carefully maneuvered the cruiser, fighting against the current. The water was rising faster now, already lapping at the platform where they stood. With practiced precision, he brought the side hatch level with their position and triggered the emergency access sequence. The hatch slid open with a hiss of pressurized air. Lyra lifted Kaya first, passing her daughter toward the opening. The child hesitated at the threshold, her wide eyes taking in the alien interior of the human vehicle. Marcus moved back to give her space, keeping his posture non-threatening. It's okay, he said softly. You're safe now. Kaya climbed inside, her movements careful and uncertain. Lyra followed quickly and Marcus sealed the hatch behind them as a larger wave crashed against the cruiser's hull. The vehicle rocked but held steady. Inside the cabin, Lyra and Kaya stood dripping on the deck plating, looking around at the human technology with obvious confusion. Everything in the cruiser was designed for human proportions and sensibilities. To them, it must have seemed alien and strange. Marcus grabbed 2 thermal blankets from the emergency supply locker. Here, he offered them to Lyra. They'll help with the wet and cold. Lyra accepted the blankets with a gesture that seemed like gratitude, wrapping one around Kaya before draping the other over her own shoulders. The child's shivers began to subside almost immediately. Xanthari body temperature ran cooler than humans, but they were still susceptible to hypothermia. "Where can I take you?" Marcus asked, settling back into the pilot's seat and checking their position on the navigation display. "Do you have family in the upper districts?" Lyra's crystalline patterns darkened. A sign Marcus had learned indicated sadness or distress. "We have no one. Our home was in the lower merchant quarter. It's been underwater for 2 weeks. We've been moving from one high point to another, waiting for the waters to recede. But they're not receding," Marcus observed, his concern growing. "They're getting worse." "Yes," Lyra said quietly. "They are." Something in her tone made Marcus turn to look at her fully. There was knowledge in her eyes, something more than just the tragedy of a natural disaster. Before he could ask, his communication system erupted with urgent chatter. Multiple voices overlapped, Xanthari security forces issuing warnings about unauthorized human activity in the flood zones. Marcus heard his own designation mentioned specifically. They were already tracking him. Lyra heard it too. Her expression became grave. "They will arrest you for helping us. The Council has made cooperation with humans a criminal offense during the crisis." "Why?" Marcus asked, genuinely confused. "We're trying to help. The Human Coordination Office has offered aid, resources, rescue teams. Why refuse?" Lyra looked down at Kaya, who had settled onto one of the passenger seats, clutching the thermal blanket. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because the Council doesn't want anyone looking too closely at why the storms are happening." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. "What do you mean?" "My husband was an atmospheric researcher," Lyra explained, her words coming faster now, as if relieved to finally share this burden. "Terran Vol. He worked for the Xanthari Environmental Institute. 3 months ago, he discovered anomalies in the storm patterns. The rainfall wasn't natural. Someone was manipulating the weather systems." "Manipulating them how?" Marcus asked, his mind racing through the implications. "Weather modification technology, banned by Xanthari law for 50 years. But Terran found evidence that Council member Vex had purchased it from off-world traders. The storms were meant to drive people from the lower districts, to make way for new development projects that would profit Vex and his associates." Marcus stared at her, horrified. "That's mass displacement. It's genocide disguised as a natural disaster." "Yes," Lyra confirmed, her crystalline patterns flashing with barely contained anger. "Terran tried to expose it. He prepared a full report with evidence, proof of the illegal technology, financial records connecting Vex to the traders. He was going to present it to the full Council. What happened to him?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. Lyra's voice broke slightly. "He died in what they called an equipment malfunction at his laboratory." "An explosion. They said it was an accident, but I know the truth. Vex had him killed to silence him.